Welcome back, everyone, to another exciting episode of the Functional Longevity Podcast. We give you insight on how to get fit, feel younger, live better. I'm your host, Chris Borda, best-selling author and owner of Y.E.S Fitness. Let me first thank you for taking time from your busy day to listen to what I have to say. And before we also get started, let me thank our sponsor, Y.E.S Fitness. Most people lose the ability to enjoy life as they age. At Y.E.S Fitness, we help people age 40 plus get fit so they can live longer and enjoy those extra years doing the things they love to do. Some quick housekeeping here. If you'd like to get a timestamp or a transcript of today's broadcast, head on over to yesfitnessct.com. Right across the top, you see a button for podcasts. Click on that button and it'll give you access to any one of our now 388 broadcasts. You can also get this broadcast wherever podcasts can be found. Boost your longevity with particular supplements. If you're training, eating well, and still dealing with low energy, brain fog, or stubborn blood sugar issues, that's usually not a motivation problem. It's a cellular one. As we age, mitochondrial function slows, metabolic control slips, and recovery takes longer. That's why I use Particular. Their NMN supports cellular energy production. Resveratrol helps protect heart and brain health, and berberine improves blood sugar control and metabolic flexibility, all critical for healthy aging after 40. These are clean, science-backed supplements made right here in the USA, and I've personally noticed better energy, focus, and recovery. If you want your body to respond again, visit particular.com. That's Particular.com and use the code YES15 for 15% off. A quiet agony that unleashes a relentless power over brain aging. If you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you've heard me say this before. Exercise is the most powerful intervention we have for slowing health decline and extending both lifespan and health span. That's not a hype. That's not a motivational fluff. That's a position grounded in decades of physiology, epidemiology, and increasingly mechanistic research. And yet, every time a new paper comes out, that reinforces this idea, especially when it connects exercise to systems we don't usually associate with the gym. I pay attention. Because the real story for longevity isn't just about living longer, it's about preserving independence, clarity, resilience, and identity as we age. Today, I want to talk to you about a growing and deeply concerning connection between skeletal muscle loss and cognitive decline, including dementia. And that's why this relationship strengthens the case for physical activity is not neutral. It's an activity harmful. The overlooked link between muscle and the brain. A recent narrative reviewed by Benier and colleagues synthesized over 100 studies examining the relationship between sarcopenia, which is age-related loss of skeletal muscle, and cognitive decline. What they found wasn't just correlation. They uncovered a web of interconnected physiological mechanisms that help explain why losing muscle may accelerate brain aging. This matters because sarcopenia has traditionally been treated as a mobility problem and something that increases fall risk or frailty. But the evidence increasingly suggests that muscle loss may also be a neurological problem. In other words, what happens in your muscle doesn't stay in your muscles. So here are 4 mechanisms that tie muscle loss to cognitive decline. The review outlines 4 physiological processes linking sarcopenia to declining brain health. Chronic systemic inflammation, insulin resistance, abnormal protein accumulation, a mitochondrial dysfunction. If those sound familiar, they should. These are the same mechanisms implicated in cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, neurodegeneration, and accelerated aging. What's new and important is not that these mechanisms exist, but that skeletal muscle appears to sit upstream of all four. And critically, these pathways do not operate in isolation. They amplify one another. Inflammation worsens insulin resistance. Insulin resistance impairs mitochondrial function. Mitochondrial dysfunction accelerates protein misfolding and oxidative stress. And the loss of muscle feeds into all of it. One of the most underappreciated facts in human physiology is that skeletal muscle is not just for movement. It's an endocrine organ. When muscle contracts, it releases signaling molecules called myokines, proteins and peptides that communicate with other tissues, including the liver, immune system, adipose tissue, and critically, the brain. Many myokines can cross the blood-brain barrier and directly stimulate neurogenesis. Others reduce neuron inflammation. Muscle-derived BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, supports mitochondrial biogenesis in neurons. It improves synaptic plasticity and protects against neurodegeneration. This is not speculative. Humans and animal studies repeatedly show that exercise-induced myokines release improved markers in brain health, learning, and memory. And here's the key point. Physical inactivity suppresses myokine release. When muscle isn't challenged, this entire signaling network goes quiet. So here's the negative spiral of inactivity. Based on this evidence, the authors propose a compelling hypothesis. The loss of skeletal muscle in physical activity reduces myokine secretion, which disrupts inter-organ communication, triggering a negative physiological spiral that ultimately contributes to cognitive decline. This reframes inactivity as in a critical way. Exercise doesn't simply add benefits on top of neural baseline. Inactivity actively removes protection. Without regular muscle contraction, anti-inflammatory signaling drops, insulin sensitivity worsens, mitochondrial quality declines, oxidative stress increases, protein turnover becomes dysregulated. Over time, this environment becomes hostile to both muscle, tissue, and neurons. And that's how mobility tissue becomes a brain issue. A common pushback is that much of the data comes from epidemiology, and that's fair. Epidemiology alone cannot prove causation, but causality can be reasonable. Causality can be reasonably inferred when several criteria are met. Number one, strong associations. Two, dose-response relationships. Consistency across populations. Biological plausibility and supporting mechanistic data. The relationships between muscle and mass and cognitive function meets many of these criteria. Higher muscle strength and physical performance are consistently associated with better cognition. Greater declines in muscle mass predict greater cognitive declines. And now we have biologically plausible mechanisms explaining how muscle loss can drive brain aging. That doesn't mean the relationship isn't one directional. The authors rightly noted that dementia can also accelerate sarcopenia through impaired motor control and reduced activity. But bidirectionality does not negate causality. It strengthens the case for intervention. This brings us to the most important practical takeaway. If skeletal muscle communicates with the brain through myokines, if inactivity suppresses that communication, and if resistance in aerobic exercise restored, then exercise is not just preventive medicine, it is neurological medicine. Strength training improves insulin sensitivity, reduces inflammation, and preserves mitochondrial function. Aerobic exercise enhances cerebral blood flow and stimulates neurotropic signaling. Combined, they create a physiological environment that supports both muscle and brain integrity. This is why people who exercise consistently show lower rates of dementia, even when controlling for education, socioeconomic status, and baseline health. So here's why muscle is the longevity organ. We often talk about heart health, brain health, metabolic health as separate silos. They're not. Skeletal muscle is the one of the few tissues that directly influences all of them. It regulates glucose disposal. It modulates inflammation. It supports mitochondrial quality. It produces signaling molecules that protect neurons. Lose muscle, and you lose leverage over aging. Preserve muscle, and you preserve optimality. This is why I continue to say that muscle is medicine, not metaphorically, but biologically. So the bottom line, this review and colleagues doesn't close the case. There are still gaps in our understanding. More interventional studies are needed to directly test these mechanisms. But the direction of the evidence is clear. Physical inactivity is not benign. Loss of skeletal muscle likely contributes to cognitive decline through disrupted myokine signaling, increased inflammation, insulin resistance, and mitochondrial dysfunction. And exercise, especially resistance training, is one of the most powerful tools we have to interrupt that process. So if you're training for aesthetics, performance, or longevity, understand this. You're not just building muscle, you're defending your brain. And that may be the most important return on investment exercise has to offer. I think this is some great research. More research needs to be done, but just again, reinforcing the fact that we need to lift weights. We need to do resistance training. We need to maintain our muscle mass. If you need help with that, contact me. Maybe you want help to give you a hand with that. We train people all over the country with today's technology. It's very, very simple. And again, thank you for watching. I'll be back again next week with more information how to get fit, feel younger, and live better.